All right. So I'm souped up. Although this presentation is called Jump, and I'll be speaking about the future of technology and really emerging technology, I want to start off with an example of some really old technology. Because this presentation has to do with ethics, if you've ever been in an ethics class, you know, any ethical thought experiment has to be as far removed from normal human life as possible. So I'm going to put you, in your imagination, in the seat of a steam engine. And this is what you see in front of you. Now, for you males in the room, this might have been your childhood dream, a little conductor's cap, real cool stuff. But this isn't going to be a joyride because, like any other ethical conundrum, you don't have brakes. In this particular instance, you don't have brakes. And as you squint your eyes, looking forward onto the tracks, you notice there's more forks in the tracks coming up, and that there appear to be some creatures that have crawled their way onto them. And now, without brakes, you have to make the very unfortunate decision of choosing from one creature from the other. Okay, luckily this is an experiment. All we have is pictures. I know this is right after lunch. They didn't tell me about that. But either way, what you're going to have to do is pick in your mind which of these creatures you'd have to hit and which one you'd save. Okay, so just make the decision in your mind. You don't have to call it out. But let's just pretend that on one side of the tracks, we have a hornet. Okay, it's landed on the tracks. This poor guy is looking for flowers, landed on the tracks. Okay, and on the other side, we have a rabbit on his back, just, you know, being lazy. Which one are you going to hit? Just make the decision in your own mind. You got to make the call. Next up, we have a rabbit on one side of the tracks, and we have a deer on the other side. Okay, so Bunny, Bambi, you have to pick. It's a little bit unfortunate. I apologize. Coming up, you got to make a quick decision. Boom, next fork in the road, we have a chimpanzee and a human being, one side or the other. I don't know how that guy got a couch on the tracks, but, you know, no idea, no idea. But anyway, you got to make the call and make it fast. Next up, in this case, we have a human being on one side of the tracks and hypothetically all the chimpanzees in the world on the other side. You either have to destroy all the chimpanzees. The last train was full of bananas. They're all crawling around there. You got to hit them all, or you have to hit a person. Make the call. Okay, I'm going to posit that in your mind, you would just use a tool that doesn't exist in real life, but that you've used in the past that we might refer to as the scale of moral weight. You've made these little decisions and calculations. For most of you, the hornet and the rabbit, it's like, how are you going to hit that? Like, you'd probably hit a person rather than that bunny. That was like the most adorable picture on Google Images. But when it came to the rabbit and the deer, that was tough. Most of you probably imagined which one of these creatures can experience the most happiness. We'll miss out on that in the future. Which one of them, maybe you thought, had relationships with other bunnies or other deer and was more embedded in that community to the point where they would suffer, where they might starve, where something bad might happen to them? Which one of them is more aware of their own personality to some degree, you know, a rabbit or a deer? And you have to think about even the ethical consequences. If you knocked out all the chimpanzees, what's going to happen to the environment? Of course, that's a lot of chimps, but what are the ramifications? And you were doing these little calculations in your mind. I would argue that you were calibrating the effect on sentient life. Okay? If I put a fern and any living creature out, in general, most of you would save the living thing. We're calibrating sentience when we're dealing with moral weight, but we're not weighing all creatures the same. Most of you would put a lot less moral weight on a hornet than you would on a rabbit. Consequently, same thing with a chimpanzee and a human being. And I would posit that's because of the breadth and the richness and depth of our consciousness. Human beings, we can write poetry. We can read Ralph Waldo Emerson in the woods. We can create art. We can build businesses. We can experience a range of fulfilling and a range of terrible emotions. And we're capable of more of that in our consciousness than we might imagine a rabbit, or we might imagine an insect. I don't know what a bug's life is like, but I can imagine it's rather limited. I think they made a Disney movie about it, but I'm pretty sure that was fake. So ultimately, the scale of moral weight is really the scale of consciousness and our impact on conscious experience. And I would argue that in these pragmatic instances of conscious decision-making, really, it's consciousness that counts. Moral weight is consciousness in many respects. And I posit that technology is on the verge of influencing consciousness. Now, you might say, Dan, that's not new news to me, buddy. Like, the printing press has been around for quite some time, spreading books to millions of minds. The Internet's out there sharing all kinds of different experiences. Snapchat sharing lewd pictures. I mean, the Internet's, consciousness has been affected by technology for quite some time. But I'm talking about something quantitatively different. I'm talking about technology that integrates directly with the brain and with the human mind and with consciousness itself. One such technology we'll talk about today, just tip of the iceberg, deep brain stimulation. This is a procedure where folks get 2 holes drilled into the top of their skull. And they have electrodes run down into particular brain centers. Now, folks who have Parkinson's, this helps to alleviate tremors. People who have severe depression are also getting this procedure now as well. to stimulate particular brain areas, take their emotional experience from maybe a -8 to maybe a -2 or maybe a 2 or something more bearable. And of course, the goal here is to alleviate suffering, to alleviate depression, but we're sort of opening up a gate of potentially being able to volitionally modulate emotion, which is a hallway we have not walked down as a species before. If we look at another technology, neural prosthetics. Neural prosthetics, very interesting. If you study any of this stuff, Ted Berger's a great guy at USC. They're working on replacing a hippocampus in rodents right now. There are plenty of other species as well. But they've created a cyborg hippocampus. Hippocampus is a portion of the brain that processes memory. And they've created a cyborg hippocampus and implanted it in the place of where a regular hippocampus was. Poor rodent, right? But they were able to toggle on or off this animal's short-term memory by toggling on or off this synthetic device. And they're working not only on ameliorating and helping to bring back memory in creatures, but even in enhancing memory in both rodents and in primates. Now, of course, the initial applications here are going to be with folks with Alzheimer's. It sure is a shame when people start to lose their memories. That's their personality, isn't it? So the initial applications will be here, but we're starting to potentially open some gates that involve augmenting our memory, maybe implanting memory or removing memory, and toggling with a domain that we have never toggled with before. This is Kathy. Kathy's a lot like many of you. Kathy's ambitious. Kathy's a go-getter. Kathy's smart. Kathy also has not been able to speak or move for 20 years. Kathy's had a stroke. And at the top of Kathy's head is a hole in her skull where she has a chip with a number of metal prongs sticking out of it pressed into the gray matter of her motor cortex. And by thinking, she's able to move that multi-jointed robotic arm and grab a coffee cup off the table, move it to her mouth, and sip out of it with a straw, put it back down. Something that many of you take for granted, but that she's able to do with her mind because she's plugged into this device. This is BrainGate around Boston, or Providence. Very, very sharp folks there. A lot of respect for their work. This is Matt, another fellow there. He's right now moving a computer cursor on a screen, answering emails with the same device plugged into his motor cortex. Replying back to emails. Of course, the goal here, right, ameliorating suffering. We're talking about treating folks who've had strokes, who are quadriplegics in terrible circumstances, but of course we're opening the gate a bit to telepathically communicating with our technologies. Now, I know you might be thinking like, all right, well, I can see how we'd be alleviating problems. Yeah, I never watched that show, but I know people do, so I just put it up there. You might be saying, okay, well, we'll fix problems. I get it. Human beings are great at fixing problems. Of course we're going to do that. But it's not like we're going to go beyond where we are now. I mean, we're not really going to do that. Of course, that's unreasonable. Of course, many unreasonable things have happened. And in addition to having you think about how many times impossible has just been beaten to smithereens by innovation in time, whether it's going to the moon, cloning mammals, human genome, I would have you consider maybe some practical situations as well. Let's imagine some folks that might be able to use telepathic communication with devices, maybe a fighter pilot who has more to manage than just their joysticks can deal with, and the pedals. We're trying to use as much of that as possible. If they have to control weapons and other facets of this machine, and they need some kind of augmentation to do that in the future, that may in fact be reasonable. Similarly speaking, if you're a quantitative trader, you're controlling 12 computer screens at once, looking at candlestick charts and all this, a little bit overwhelming for a human being. And if the people sitting next to you are moving with a mouse and clicking, dragging from screen to screen, and you're able to control a couple of those screens, or maybe a good deal of them with a portion of your mind, or even drink in some of that information, some of those patterns and trends to be able to make faster decisions, is it possible that you just be that much more efficient? Now, of course, this is the future, but let's look at the past. So 20 years ago, you were a weirdo if you had a cell phone. I mean, that guy was probably cool back then, but now everybody will laugh at him because he's on Google Images forever. Super unfortunate. I'm never taking pictures with technology because I know I'll just be like him. So the fact of the matter is, so that was goofy back then. But now you cannot get a sales job or a number of other jobs if you don't have a cell phone. Hi, I'd like the job. I don't have a cell phone. Get out. You're done. See ya. To think that in 50 years, Excel, Word, and a cell phone are going to be the requirements to getting a job is obscene. And to totally count out the idea that augmentation might be part of what's required for at least certain roles would be more laughable than that picture, in my personal opinion. Let's talk about enhancing memory. I know when I talked about enhancing memory, there were some of the folks, married folks, probably elbowing each other. But I know there's already a market for not forgetting anniversaries and birthdays, right? Like even just that bit of that device would be, man, that'd be a moneymaker there. But let's think about reasonable applications, okay? Supposing this is a little bit more of an intense procedure, maybe it's very expensive. who might be best to first augment in terms of enhancing memory to some degree. We might think maybe folks with a lot of responsibility, maybe some semblance of politician who has to make decisions around policy. All right? If you have to make decisions around policy, wouldn't it be handy to have just the most fantastic memory ever of all of the ramifications of previous policy decisions on education, on environment, on economy, etc., and calibrate and make better decisions for humanity? By golly, that sounds important. At the same time, what if we could take the last 100 years of policy and its ramifications in various domains and plug that into somebody's mind too? That'd be a better leader, maybe, but it might also be a worse leader. Because that person could take advantage of people who have normal faculties, and maybe they would use it for malicious ends. They'd be like a superhuman, taking advantage of people. So maybe we should set some kind of laws around, if we can enhance human memory, we'll stop it at like a certain point, because then we wouldn't create superhumans, we'd be able to alleviate that. And I'm sure if we set a law in the United States to not do that, countries like Russia or China, they definitely would. No, they would. late laughter, that's how you know it worked. All right, so next up, how about happiness, folks? I understand the argument here. I get it. Like, why? Who's going to undergo a cyborg procedure, pal? Like, why not live a life that's in line with what human happiness is, with your own fulfillment? Why not understand yourself? Why not live in line with that? And I agree, but I think that the dozens of people walking around with holes in their head to treat depression is a pretty good sign there's a market for it. And at the same time, if we look up at this chart, this is the drugs most commonly sold, biggest sellers last year. Number one is Abilify. Antidepressant, one of many antidepressants. This one just happens to be $6.5 billion. Lots of bucks going there. I'm going to posit this, folks. I'm going to posit that when we can touch on satisfaction itself, dial down emotions we don't like, dial up emotions that we can't, even in some rudimentary level, there's a market for it. And that is going to open up an ethical ball of wax that we are not even close to handling right now, and goes far beyond what antidepressants and their side effects have ever brought to the fore for humanity. Brings me to a conversation with Neil Tyson deGrasse. He has a presentation. Many of you folks know this guy. Great speaker. And he talks about the relatively small differences between a chimpanzee and a human being at the level of genetic code. And he ponders what kind of small tweaking and adjusting are required to make that next step. Think about the massive jump talking about jump, chimpanzee to human being. I mean, goodness gracious, creativity, intelligence, our ability to relate, our ability to feel. What does that look like at the next level? What does it look like? And what do we have to do to get there? And are we moving there without knowing it? If you remember, pretty much all of you would have killed the chimpanzee rather than the human being. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? Worth more on the moral scale, can experience more sentient depth. But at the same time, some of you, in your own mind, you don't have to raise your hand or anything, but some of you would have killed all the chimpanzees to save one person. So what does this situation sort of put us in? I don't know, it's pretty interesting. We make this assumption that the human sentient and conscious experience is the entire breadth of sentient experience itself. Not the case. Nick Bosser of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, not too long ago, TED Talk, had reminded us that we may be just pushing the boundaries on a much further expanse of cognitive and emotive experience that we are not even capable of comprehending right now. I like to make the analogy of the environment. Because like consciousness is now, in my personal opinion, 60 years ago, the environment wasn't all that cool. It wasn't all that cool to be involved in. Nobody really cared. There were no pressing issues yet. And I think that's probably the reason that we're poor stewards of the environment, that we did a bad job. And I think the only reason we care about being stewards of the environment now is because it houses sentient life. We're starting to realize, oh golly, if the whole ocean is full of plastic, there's going to be we're realizing it's going to hurt us. It's hurting sentient entities. Very few of you are environmentalists because you want to save granite. More of you care about animals, humanity, our future, sentience. And I posit that not only are we the stewards of the environment, are we stewards of the next generation, but that we are now stewards of sentience, whether we want to be or not. Evolution has taken us thus far, and now we're going to start to make those next steps, and it's opening up a can of worms we're just not prepared to tackle. We're in a world where folks who are paralyzed are controlling robotic arms with their minds, where people are getting electrodes put into their brains to feel better, and where rodents are having their memory enhanced or toggled on or off with a light switch. We're coming to a cross-section that we've never come to before as a species, and I think it's a rather important one. And if it is consciousness that counts, I didn't come here with the answers. So these are big questions. This is a big white canvas. I didn't come here with the answers. I came here to start a well-intended, open-minded and interdisciplinary conversation about something that I think is of great import. And if in fact we can agree that it is consciousness that is the bedrock of our moral decision-making, then if there's any reason for us to collaborate as business people, as scientists, as a global community, is it not tinkering with or creating consciousness itself? That's all I got. Thank you.